Social Studies Module 3, Government and Civics. United States Government. The United States government is a representative democracy, or a republic. This is a form of democracy in which people elect representatives to make laws on their behalf. This is different than a direct democracy, where every citizen votes on every law. A key concept in democracy is the idea of popular sovereignty. The idea that the power to govern comes from the consent of the people being governed. The United States government is made up of 3 separate branches, each of which has different jobs and different powers. This concept is called the separation of powers. The purpose is to provide a system of checks and balances so that no one branch or one person becomes too powerful. 3 branches of government. The legislative branch of government is responsible for creating and passing laws. In the United States, our legislature is bicameral, meaning that it is composed of 2 separate legislative bodies. The House of Representatives is the legislative body with 435 members who are assigned to states based on their population. The number of representatives assigned to each state is determined by the census. The Senate is a legislative body in which each state has 2 members regardless of the population. If there is a tied vote in the Senate, the Vice President casts the tie-breaking vote. Bills, or proposed laws, can come from the House or from the Senate. For a bill to become a law, it must be approved by both bodies and signed by the President. The judicial branch of the federal government is the Supreme Court and the federal courts under it. It's the job of the judicial branch to interpret the meaning of laws and to determine whether or not laws contradict the Constitution. Members of the Supreme Court are appointed for life, so they can make decisions impartially without fearing political consequences. This means that although they are appointed by a president and voted on by Congress, they are not subject to the views of either once they are sworn in. The President is the head of the executive branch of the government. The job of the executive branch of government is to carry out and enforce the laws. The executive branch includes the Vice President and a cabinet of advisors who serve with the President and the Vice President. In addition, there are many departments, agencies, and bureaus that are a part of the executive branch. All of these agencies serve under the direction of the President. The President is also Commander-in-Chief of all the United States Armed Forces. Review question. What is the purpose of having the government divided into 3 separate branches? A. This is a cost control measure to help ensure that the government runs efficiently due to competition among the branches. B. This creates a system of checks and balances so no one branch becomes too powerful. C. This ensures that the President has control over all 3 branches of government during his or her time in office. Or D. This reduces the tax burden on citizens by giving them a variety of options for government services. The correct answer is B. The purpose of having the government divided into 3 branches is to create a system of checks and balances so no one branch of government becomes too powerful. Election process in the United States. Leaders at every level of government are elected by the people, but elections take place in different ways. Most candidates begin their election process by being nominated by a political party, a group of people with shared values who agree to support the individual's campaign for office. In the United States, the 2 major political parties are the Republican Party, also called the GOP or Grand Old Party, and the Democratic Party. There are also many smaller political parties called third parties who support candidates for office. In addition to political parties, there are interest groups called PACs or political action committees who support candidates by informing the public about the candidate's position on particular issues. In local and state elections, states are divided into geographic regions, and they elect people to represent their geographic region. A ward is the smallest electoral unit that represents part of a city. Each ward will elect people to represent them in their city government. Just as cities are divided into wards, states are divided into districts. A district is a geographic area that votes on a representative. Since states have only 2 senators that represent the entire state, there are not districts for these. The entire state votes for senators. Representatives are tied to geographic regions. State legislatures also have different districts for the state House of Representatives and the state Senate. It is important to know that one voter may be voting as part of their state for Senate, part of their congressional district for House, and part of separate districts for their state Senate and state House of Representatives. The number of different districts and the different boundaries allows for gerrymandering, a process through which the party in power in a state draws the district lines deliberately to break up geographic areas that generally oppose them into small segments that are part of districts that generally vote in favor of their party. For this reason, incumbents, or people in office, generally tend to get re-elected. Review question. How is the number of representatives in the House of Representatives determined for each state? A. There are 2 representatives per state. B. Representatives are assigned to states based on census data. C. The President decides how many representatives each state will receive. Or D. The political party that holds power in both the House and the Senate has the right to determine the number of representatives. The correct answer is B. The number of representatives are assigned to each state based on census data. In the United States, people do not vote directly for the president. Instead, the Electoral College actually elects the president. The number of electors assigned to each state is based on population. Each state holds a presidential election, and the political party who wins gets to choose the state's electors. Those electors go to the Electoral College and cast the state's votes for president. Because of this, it is possible to win the popular vote nationally and still lose a presidential elections. One of the concerns many people express about the Electoral College is that people who live in areas with lower populations have a greater impact on our presidential elections than people who live in areas with larger populations because there are fewer people per elector. Federal and state government. The relationship between the federal and state government is described as federalism, a system where more than one government entity has power over a given geographic area. In a federalist system, some powers are held exclusively by one level of government, while others are held concurrently by more than one level of government. For example, issuing a driver's license is an exclusive power held by the states, whereas enforcing laws is a power that is held concurrently by the federal, state, and local governments. When power is held concurrently, levels of government must work together under the direction of the federal government. In the United States, federal and state governments must work together because they share power. However, city and county governments are granted power by the state. Review question. What is the term for a governmental system that divides power between a national government and state governments? A. A republican system. B. A democratic system. C. A federalist system. Or D. A representative democracy system. The correct answer is C. The term for a governmental system that divides power between a national governments and state governments is a federalist system. The Constitution. 2 major factions influenced the development of the Constitution: Federalists and Anti-Federalists. Federalists wanted a strong central government, a federal government, to have jurisdiction over all the states. Anti-Federalists wanted a federal government that was an alliance between independent states but that did not have as much control over the states. The Constitution as it exists today is a compromise between these two points of view. The Bill of Rights is a result of the anti-federalist desire to protect individuals from a government with too much power. The Constitution, as we know it today, officially became the law of the United States of America on June 21, 1788. On that day, New Hampshire became the 9th of the 13 states to ratify it. The Constitution was not ratified by all states until May 29, 1790, when Rhode Island, the last state, ratified it. The Constitution, a living document. The Supreme Court is the branch of government charged with interpreting the Constitution. It is their duty to know and understand what it says and to interpret how it applies in specific situations. It is important to remember that their interpretation of the Constitution becomes case law or judicial law, meaning that their ruling has the force of law because it is the official interpretation that all later courts will use to understand what the law means. Amendments are official changes to the Constitution. An amendment may be made by a 2/3 majority of Congress voting for an amendment or by 2/3 of the state legislatures calling for a constitutional convention. Note: all current amendments have been passed by Congress. The state legislatures have never called for a constitutional convention. Civil rights and civil liberties. Laws can be divided into two broad categories: civil law and criminal law. Criminal law deals with actions that are prohibited by the state and sets forth consequences for those actions. Civil law deals with non-criminal matters and addresses the rights of the individual living in a society. When people say that they are fighting for their civil rights, what they mean is that they are seeking to have their political freedom and social equality recognized legally. There have been many minority groups that have fought for their civil rights through the course of American history. The foundation of all civil rights is the United States Constitution that guarantees life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all citizens. The Civil Rights Movement. The 14th and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution declared that African Americans had equal protection under the law and gave African American men the right to vote. However, many states passed laws designed to circumvent or to create barriers to African Americans being able to fully exercise their legal rights. In the South, states passed Jim Crow laws based on the 1896 Supreme Court case Plessy v. Ferguson, saying that African Americans would remain separate but equal. While they did remain separate, they were far from equal. African Americans faced discrimination at all levels of society. They were unable to stay in white hotels or eat at white restaurants. They were relegated to restricted seating on public transportation and faced discrimination in housing. African Americans were also forced to attend different schools that were not given the same funding and resources as white schools. Southern states knew they couldn't deny African Americans the right to vote, so instead they had created administrative barriers to make it difficult for African Americans to actually be able to use their right to vote. This tactic, paired with limited educational opportunities, made it very difficult for African Americans to fully utilize the rights that the 14th and 15th Amendments had promised. Tools such as poll taxes and literacy tests were used to deny people the right to vote. By denying them the right to vote, Southern states were able to keep African Americans from having a voice in the selection of leaders and the passing of laws. The Civil Rights Act of 1957 allowed federal prosecution of anyone who tried to prevent someone from voting and created a commission to investigate voter fraud. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 provided for equal employment, put limitations on the use of literacy tests, and gave federal authorities the power to integrate public spaces. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 banned all literacy tests, allowed federal oversight of elections in some places, and gave the Attorney General the ability to challenge poll taxes in court. Poll taxes were found unconstitutional in Harper v. Virginia State Board of Elections, 1966. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 prohibited housing discrimination based on race, sex, national origin, and religion. Review question. What was the major outcome of the civil rights movement? A. Increased legal equality for racial minorities. B. Increased legal equality for women. C. Increased legal equality for immigrants. Or D. Increased legal equality for the poor. The correct answer is A. The major outcome of the civil rights movement was increased legal equality for racial minorities. The women's rights movement. From colonial times, women were prohibited from owning property in their own name or transacting business. The 14th Amendment, 1866, defined citizens and voters as male, making gender discrimination constitutional. In 1873, the Supreme Court ruled that a state could prohibit married women from practicing law, Bradwell v. the State of Illinois. In 1890, Wyoming granted women the right to vote in all elections. By 1900, all states had made it legal for married women to own property in their own name. And in 1920, the 19th Amendment to the Constitution guaranteed women the right to vote. In 1963, the Equal Pay Act guaranteed equitable wages for the same work, regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, or sex of the worker. In 1964, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act prohibited discrimination in employment and created the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. In 1972, Title IX of the Education Amendments prohibited sex discrimination in education programs that receive federal funding. In 1981, Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed to the Supreme Court. She was the first female Supreme Court justice. In 1997, Madeleine Albright became the first woman to serve as Secretary of State. In 2007, Nancy Pelosi became the first woman to serve as Speaker of the House. In 2008, Sarah Palin became the first woman to run for Vice President on the ticket of a major political party. In 2016, Hillary Clinton became the first woman to run for President on the ticket of a major political party. And in 2020, Kamala Harris became the first woman to serve as Vice President. Media in American politics. Media plays an important role in American politics. The first televised debate featuring presidential candidates was the Kennedy-Nixon debate in 1960. Kennedy's looks and apparent vigor played an important role in his election. The influence of media has increased exponentially since that first illustration of its power. News networks have developed to target audiences with similar political views. Social media has also played a huge role in American politics, with information and disinformation spreading quickly. Disinformation is information that is deliberately inaccurate. Review question. What law gave women protection from employment discrimination? Title VI, Title VII, Title VIII, or Title IX? The correct answer is Title VII. Title VII was the law that gave women protection from employment discrimination. Citizenship. Citizenship consists of three important parts: rights, responsibilities, and duties. Rights are granted by U.S. law and guaranteed to every citizen. Examples of some of the rights U.S. citizens enjoy include freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the right to a fair and speedy trial by jury, the right to vote, the right to work for the federal government, the right to run for an elected political position, and the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. As our Constitution says, we are also granted many more rights that are not specifically enumerated. Just as citizenship comes with rights, it also comes with responsibilities. Responsibilities are things that you should do, but that there is no legal penalty if you fail to do. The responsibilities of a good citizen include being an informed voter, participating in elections by voting, and being respectful of the rights and opinions of others, even when you disagree. The duties of a citizen are things that you are required to do by law and could face a penalty if you fail to do. The first and most important duty of every American citizen is to support and defend the United States Constitution. We should also respect and obey federal, state, and local laws. You should pay your taxes. You should serve on a jury when called upon. And you should register for selective service and defend your country if asked to do so. Review question. Which of the following is a duty of a United States citizen? A. Participate in federal, state, and local elections. B. Respect the rights and the opinions of others. C. Support and defend the United States Constitution. Or D. Be an informed voter. The correct answer is C. It is the duty of a citizen to support and defend the United States Constitution. As citizens, we are responsible for participating in elections, respecting others, and being informed voters, but we have a duty to defend our Constitution. Political systems. Democracy. Democracy is a political system with a government where leadership is chosen by the people in the country through an election process. Businesses are privately owned by people or companies, not the government. Communism is a one-party political system in which private ownership of property and business is replaced by communally owned or publicly owned property and business. Communist governments tend to be very authoritarian. Socialism is a political system that mixes public and private ownership, with government still owning or regulating most sectors of the economy. Private ownership is often allowed, taxes are higher, and most essential services are tax-funded. Socialist societies tend to have more freedom than communist societies and less government control. Oligarchy. An oligarchy is a system of government in which a small group of individuals has control over the country with no input from the people outside that group. Membership in the ruling group may be based on race, social class, heredity, etc. This is an authoritarian form of rule because the people being ruled have no voice in their government. Monarchy and aristocracy. This is a system of government based on heredity, where people are given leadership positions based on their family's position in society. Note that some monarchies are primarily symbolic, with elected legislatures holding the real power to make laws, while others border on dictatorships or oligarchies, depending on the makeup of the country's government. A theocracy is a government based on the rules and teachings of a religion. Instead of separation of church and state, these countries treat church and state as a single entity, so that religious leaders also hold political power and political leaders hold religious authority. Totalitarianism. Totalitarianism is a system of government where the leadership has no limits on its power. In most governments, leaders are limited by the rule of law, and even leaders must obey the law. In a totalitarian society, the government is all-powerful and not bound by rules. A dictatorship. A dictatorship is a totalitarian government run by a single individual or dictator and those loyal to him or her. Political systems and economic conditions. Democratic political systems, constitutional monarchies, monarchies where the king or queen is primarily symbolic, and even some partially socialist countries tend to have capitalist economic systems. Capitalism is an economic system in which people invest capital or money in hopes of making a profit. Businesses are privately owned, and the government does not control supply and demand. Communism, oligarchy, theocracy, and totalitarian states tend to have economies that are under the control of the government. While this control may have varying degrees, and some private ownership may be allowed, the government is integrally involved in the economy because that level of involvement is necessary to maintain political control. Review question. What is the primary difference between capitalism and communism? A. The primary difference is who owns businesses. B. The primary difference is in the type of currency they use. C. The primary difference is in their banking systems. Or D. The primary difference is in their justice systems. The correct answer is A. The primary difference between capitalism and communism is who owns businesses, the government or private individuals.